Hey everybody, welcome to the first, let's call it conversation of fishing industry conversation. Why we are here today is I felt that there is a lot of information out there regarding the fishing industry. The fishing industry is massive in South Africa. And of course, we have a very important fishing rights application process coming on towards the end of the year. And I just thought it would really add value to the fishing industry to chat to people in the fishing industry, experts, stakeholders. I've got quite a few people planned to have a conversation with. I want to chat to the CEOs of big companies. I want to chat to the CEOs of small companies. I want to chat to the small scale fisher. I want to chat to NGOs. So there's a lot of people in the fishing industry that I think would really add value to the conversation. Currently, there isn't such a platform. And I just thought it would be really interesting for me because I'm in the fishing industry and I think it would add value. So without further ado, my first guest, her name is Ms. Ndudane. They know her as Siphokazi Ndudane. Siphokazi, I got the bio here. She started in the Stellenbosch University Business School. She moved over to National Research and Foundation, and then she headed into the fishing industry. And Siphokazi is here today purely to discuss fishing rights application process. She's been in the fishing industry for probably half her life. And I just wanted her to add some value to the conversation, how she found the previous FRAP process. Of course, we totally understand that all the FRAP processes are very different. And Ms. Ndudane is going to, of course, explain that to us. She's been through a few. But on the offset, I think, just so everybody is protected, I think we just need to say that all the views here has got nothing to do, is no views of the fishing department. Ms. Ndudane is not employee of the fishing department anymore. And also it's not the views of Curriculum Consult. I'm a consulting business in the fishing industry. And I think conversations like this would be able to add value to the fishing industry. So, Ms. Ndudane, how are you, madam?
Yeah, thank you, Miles, for hosting me here. I'm good, and greetings to all your viewers.
Thank you so much. So before we get into your technical side of your brain, let's hear who is Siphokazi Ndudane and how did she land up in the fishing industry?
Quite interesting, actually, because my training is in zoology. My first training was in zoology and marine science, but I got involved in the fishing industry around early 2000s, and in specifically 2001, when I got a privilege, which I'm grateful and thankful for, through the government of Norway, of studying fisheries science and fisheries management, masters in Bergen University in Norway. That was my real kind of baptism, if I were to say, into the fishing industry. Previously, I've been to sea on fishing research vessels, only on research vessels rather than fishing vessels. But when I went to study in Norway between 2002 and 2004, I got to see a broader side of fisheries economy, in fact, not just the industry, because I think it loses the meaning when we say fishing industry. And I want to call it in the terms of fisheries economy. So I went out to sea on fishing vessels. I was working for my master's program around Norway. And those that are familiar with the fishing space, they will know that the Norwegians are one of the top-notch countries when it comes to fisheries. Their capabilities, their technologies, and the knowledge base, basically. So that was kind of my starting to really see the side of fishing industry, why the industry is so important to livelihoods, job creation, in it being providing a source of income and source of food as a protein. So that was my basic kind of engagement. Then I returned from studying from abroad, and I got employed in the department around 2005, which was the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism at the time. Short stint there. I left. I went to work in other areas, as you have mentioned, National Research Foundation and the Stellenbosch Business School. But although I went to these other areas, I still carried the fisheries or stroke marine environment or kind of a working space. So fast forward 10 years later, I rejoined the department in 2014. And I've been in the department since that time until last year in November. So I was then again fully involved in the fishing space in South Africa, not only in South Africa, in the region and internationally as well. I've allocated fishing rights in 2015. I was involved in the process in 2005 when I was there. So that's kind of the overall background and space and time that I've spent in the fishing space.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, so just to give some of the viewers an introduction about the conversation regarding fishing rights application. So we all know the fishing rights application process 2020. There are, I think, 12 species currently up for renewal. And according to the Gazette timeline, is that they will start in October with some of the policies that will be out. So Siphokazi, you have been involved in a few FRAP processes. I think the biggest one is probably 2015, 2016. Tell us a bit about your experience in that process from, I mean, you were there from start up until finish. Just understand, like, of course, we have the CS reports. How's that done for the fishing sectors? The application and the draft policy, which policies are up for draft, and then when it is released, the public participation process. So, of course, this is totally different to the 2021 because every time it changes, you can explain that. So just give us some background on how, for people that don't understand the fishing rights application process, briefly, how does it work and from beginning to end?
Thank you, Matt. I think it's critical that even before I talk on the process of rights allocation, is to perhaps talk about why there is a rights allocation process. What is it? And I think it's important because I have taken a little bit of a look in some of the people that have tuned in today. Not all of them are currently in the fishing space. So I think it's quite important to give a little bit of a background and context as to why are rights being allocated before we get to the process. So, kind of starting at the beginning, South Africa has 22 classified fisheries according to the type of fish or species that is being fished or the area it is being fished from. If it is hake, for instance, it would be deep sea hake classification. It would have inshore hake because of where it is being fished. It would have long line because of the method that is being fished. So all of these classifications, they add up to 22 commercial fisheries sectors. Now, the reason why these rights are being allocated is simple because the legislation that governs the management of fishing or the management of living marine resources in the country is a piece of legislation known as the Marine Living Resources Act that was promulgated in 1998. So this act recognizes that fishing rights are not property rights, but it is just a privilege that is granted to individuals so that they can harvest and harness and utilize the resource. So the resource, in essence, is a state-owned resource because the ocean space, the air space, the land space is a territorial space of the state. Now, Section 18 of the Act clarifies it very well that no individual may undertake any fishing, whether commercial, subsistence, in the territorial waters of South Africa. Now, South Africa is a coastline of almost 4,000 kilometers from the border of Namibia to the border of Mozambique. We have a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. So within these waters, nobody can do fishing if that individual, as according to the legislation, the MRLA, is not granted a permission to do so by the minister. And the minister here, representative of the state. Now, those rights are valid for a period of 8 years. Some are valid for a period of 10 years. And the maximum, as per the legislation, is 15 years. So you get a right, and your maximum time of that right becomes 15 years. When that right expires, it then reverts back to the state, and the state reserves the right to reallocate that right. So that's the process that is being done when we say fishing rights allocation process. So the rights that are due for allocation, they were allocated in 2005. Some were allocated in 2013. The 2013 were 8 years, and the others were 15 years. So they are all now coming to expire. The process needs to start of allocation. How is the process run? Now, I need to be clear.
Sorry, can I just ask you, I just want to ask you one question. Why do we have 15 years as maximum? Is it because the world does it in 15 years, or why is 15 years being chosen as an allocation period?
There's been an evolution of the discussion around why the 15 years. But some of the issue is that prior 1994, the rights would be allocated almost on a yearly basis or on a 2-year basis, the validity of the rights. Now, as we are going to be explaining, and as you are going to be engaging, and I'm glad that you will be engaging NGOs and other experts in the sector, you will recognize and appreciate the tedious exercise rights allocation process is. Now, imagine if you are putting out applications, you receive 10,000 applications, as usually it would be the case. It's voluminous, it takes time, do public engagements, drawing up policies and draft policies and everything. Now, imagine if you are to do this on a yearly basis, or you are to do it every second year. I can promise you, people will basically have nothing else to do but just to allocate fishing rights for the rest of their employment. So that's one issue. But the other issue that is quite critical is that fishing, there's 22 sectors that I've talked about. They range from very high intensive, high capital kind of sectors like your deep sea hake trawl, your small pelagics, which are your pilchards and your anchovies. So imagine if you are to get a right for 1 year and you have made a loan at a bank or whoever your finance institution is. Now, in terms of certainty, you would have borrowed money to buy a vessel for 85 million, for instance. You would have put up a factory and other, equipment and stuff like that. Now, how do you, in a year's time, pay back that? And who, in fact, is going to give you money when they can see that there is no certainty on the return of their investment? So it became quite a component into the discussion in terms of not only the administrative process being tedious, but also providing some form of certainty that you can have this right for a period of 8 years, 10 years, and maximum basically is 15 years, because it tries to say that you cannot be a lifetime holder of a fishing right because it belongs to everybody, but you are just granted an opportunity.
Perfect. Right. So now we move on
to the process. Yeah. So now coming to the process, and I want to emphasize this, and I'm happy that you have indicated that this is not the position of the department. Now, of course, it can be confused because I worked in the department, and some other people might have a little bit of a confusion around that. Now, I'm talking, basing the argument on the legislation. Now, the legislation, as I indicate, says allocate fishing rights. The legislation says give credence to the following issues when you allocate fishing rights. Credence to new entrants, credence to giving opportunities to women, giving opportunities to youth, and giving credence to the sustainability of how we conserve the resource, because again, the fish resources are depletable. So you want to do the process of allowing people to fish, but cognizant that we have to, at the same time, preserve for the future generation. So what the legislation does not do is to tell you how the fishing rights need to be allocated. But because this is an administrative process, and any administration decision needs to be anchored and centered around the rationality test. So the rationality test basically is about doing what you do in a consistent manner. So meaning that you don't discriminate between applicant X and applicant Y. The criteria that you set and how you are going to judge the applications is not going to be different when you get to applicant X and you change it at applicant Y. So consistency is one of the major critical things when you deal with administrative decisions. The second issue is around the issue of transparency and accountability. It's debatable how far you can get transparent with the FREP process, but the process of public consultations with the draft policies contributes to that element of transparency, because basically what you do, you go out to assist people to understand that this is the process we will follow. This is the direction that we may go. These are the policy imperatives that we are going to be looking at. Now, the third element around the rationality test of an administrative decision is the lawfulness. You cannot, when you allocate fishing rights, do things that are unlawful. So every decision that you make, every criteria that you take, everything that you add or take away needs to be anchored around lawfulness. So basically then, you would, when you do rights allocation, you start with developing the policies that are going to be the guide. So the policy basically that you develop is kind of a peep, if I were to say, a kind of a little window of what you must expect. So there is a general policy for fishing rights allocation that was developed in 2013. Then you get to sector-specific policies. Now, those two policies are very critical when they go to public consultation, that people must engage with these policies. And I want to emphasize this part, Miles, because rights allocation process, more often than not, applicants give it to consultants to run the process for them. I'm not saying they should not do that, but I'm saying applicants, even if you outsource the function, familiarize yourself with the policy, because it's critical that you tilt your companies or you place things where it matters the most. Place your assets where it matters the most. Look at transformation where it is going to matter the most, because procurement, BEE procurement, is not going to count that much or may not count that much. Look where things matter the most. So I always want to say, people must not leave it up to consultants entirely. You need to be cognizant of the fact that you must familiarize yourself with these policies. So once these policies are drafted, they go out on a public consultation. Again, public consultation is important, that you must make your views known. Some people don't bother to make comments during the public comment period, and they just leave it to others to do this. It's very critical, because in those policies, applicants or those aspiring to get into the sector need to analyze and see if there are no barriers of entry that can be put up within the policies. And it's the unfortunate consequence of any policy. Policy seeks to address a particular thing, but you find that in the process of addressing whatever you seek to address with the policy may have unintended consequences. And what we have seen on previous rights allocation in 2005, in 2013, in 2015, is that some of the things that come up into policies, they are not necessarily there to deter people or to become barriers. But when you start looking deeper into them, you find that these things are actually barriers to entry. So it's quite important for people to look at those things. So it becomes an extensive work of going out into public consultations, and you must make sure that people understand different languages. The policies get printed in different languages, and there's extensive road shows that get done so that people can get a glimpse into the policies themselves. Once that is done, then the comments are collated, looked at, then an evaluation is always done. What comments to incorporate to the policies, what comments not to incorporate to the policies. Once that is done, you gazette the final policies. Then the actual application process starts, where the application forms now get distributed in various distribution centers. So I want to liken it to a voting kind of a thing, to say rights allocation is very similar to an IEC a process, whereby you are having various stations throughout the whole country to be able to do this. One of the most important things perhaps I must touch into this is that in the previous rights allocations, usually there would be a focus more on coastal provinces, so Northern Cape, Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and KZN. But now the issue is that in particular, I recall in 2015, when we were allocating fishing rights, the portfolio committee was like, hang on, are you saying the people that must enter into this sector are only coastal people? What about the people inland? So in 2015, we even did inland consultations. It's debatable whether there is value to do that or not. It may happen this time around. I have no idea what has happened. I don't have a crystal ball to see what the department is going to do. But there is a political voice from time to time to say, hang on, open this process up to all citizens of the country so that they can make their decisions to want to participate or not to want to participate. Now, this is an important issue to say that people should not wait until the application forms are distributed for applying for fishing rights. It's important to start now. And as you've said, the timelines that have been published by the department in the next approximately about 6 months is going to be the beginning of the actual applications themselves. I want to say to people, they should not wait for that. Companies should not wait for that. They need to see and how they can, as I say, package their companies and what to put in various elements. Familiarize themselves. The previous policies are available. They are public knowledge. So it's not like you are going to have to ask them from the department. They are available still, I think, on the old website of the then Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries website. But they are easily accessible, basically. And you may recall that the last year there was a launch of FREP that happened in Somerset West, and there were draft policies that were put there. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know whether those draft policies will remain or they will change or they will slightly change. It is going to depend. But I think the major content of the information that is there will be helpful to all aspirant applicants to engage with that process.
Okay, awesome.
Now, the most difficult part, after all this process is done, application forms have come back and everything, is the assessment of the applications themselves. Now, I've seen bad, good, the ugly, and really in terms of how rights application are done by different applicants. It's very important to make sure that every information you put there is verifiable and it is correct. And if you are judging by the announcement, recent announcement the department has done recently when they were advertising for service providers to show interest for the various things that are going to be done in FREP, you will not miss that there is an element that seeks to do verification of the truthfulness of the information that gets submitted. So it's quite critical that people, whatever they put, is something that is verifiable and that can be proven. Don't wait for the department to request you to prove or verify that. Provide the information yourself. So it's critical what information you provide, how you package the information that you, and in particular for new entrants, people who are entering the sector for the first time, or applicants that hold fishing rights in other sectors, but they will be applying in that particular sector for the first time. Because remember, the competition becomes quite high because you are competing with people who have held these rights for the past 15 years or so. Now, you really need to step up your game to showcase that indeed the state can hold you to be a trustworthy person to be granted this opportunity, and you can live up to it, and you can showcase that you can be a good custodian of the privilege that the state affords to you.
Siphokazi, I wanted to ask you a question, especially on from 2015 for new entrants. So of course, there are a lot of people that want to enter the industry. So I have a company. Me and my wife want to start a company. We want to become new entrants. In 2015 and 2016, how will new entrants looked at? I mean, was they said we're going to give 10% away to new entrants and keep because you have category A, you've got category B, you've got category C. So of course you have to accommodate 3 categories for one basket or one basket. So what was the thinking in 2015 regarding new entrants?
That's a very good question, actually, Miles. And I think let us not take that from what people prefer it should be. Let's go again back to the legislation. So let's go back to the MRLA. And in particular, we go to Section 2 of the Marine Living Resources Act, which outlines the objectives. There's 13 objectives that have been listed under that. Read those objectives in line with Section 18.5 of the Act. So Section 18.5 of the Act says that when granting the fishing rights, the minister shall give credence to the need to allow new entrants, in particular those from historically disadvantaged background, in particular the youth, in particular women and people with disability. So this is a legislation of government. There is no two-way about it. And it says, shall. You are a lawyer, Miles. I'm not trained in law. I always hear lawyers say when the legislation says shall and may, it's 2 distinct things, debatable, of course. Yes, so it says shall give that. So it is a legislation that gives an obligation on rights allocation for the need for the new entrants to be considered. And it says in particular those from previously disadvantaged. Now, previously disadvantaged, I think here I want to put a context to it because it's important for people to understand fishing rights allocation pre-94. Pre-94, non-white people were given fishing rights, and it was a legislation that if you are non-white, you cannot get a fishing right. So when the Act was promulgated in 1998, the MRLA, basically it was giving an opportunity and a kind of a commanding instruction, if I were to say, if you are looking at the whole complete objectives of the MRLA on Section 2 of the Act. So it is kind of wanting to redress the imbalances of the past. You go to the preamble of the Act, preamble of the Marine Living Resources Act. talks about the utilization that is sustainable, conservation of those resources. It talks about the need of fair and equitable way of ensuring that the access into the fishing is broadened. It could be a discussion for another day. It's quite broad as it is put. It can mean different things to different people at different times. So the issue around new entrants, therefore, is it becomes a burden, if I were to say, maybe burden is a bad word, and obligation is a better word. It's an obligation. How then you make sure that new entrants are accommodated becomes a completely different discussion and story. It also depends on the allocation, on the people allocating the fishing rights at that particular time. So I'm not going to talk about the others I don't know. I will talk about what I did in 2015 when we were allocating fishing rights. And in fact, what I say can be backed up with the Viking case, which is a source of good information. I would advise people who are aspiring to get into the fishing space to read the judgment in the Viking case against the Minister of Agriculture, Forest and Fisheries, and to also perhaps in part of those documents to read the affidavit that went to that. So basically, because as I say, fish is depletable. So when you have 10,000 tons of fish to give to everybody, you need to make a decision of how much of the 10,000 ton available of fish that is sustainable to be taken out of the water, what percentage of that must go to new entrants? What percentage must go to those that are getting into the sector for the first time, but they hold fishing rights in other sectors? What portion must go to those returning applicants that have held this right for 15 years? It's a broad spectrum. It is guided by a number of things. It is guided by the performance of those returning. It is guided by the type of the investments that have been made. It is also guided by the number of jobs to be created or sustained. It is guided by local economic development. So it's a great range of array of things that you need to put into consideration. So, as I said in the beginning, what you do, whether you decide on 10% for new entrants or 20% or 50%, you need to be guided by the law of rationality that I have explained in the beginning, so that you can be able to defend should there be litigation. And now it's a very interesting thing. I always say, when you allocate fishing rights and there's no litigation, you must know that you have done things in a very bad way. It is impossible to please everybody in an allocation process. It's a very hard balancing process, very, very, very tricky. So there will always be those that are unhappy. They may be unhappy because you have taken a little bit on what they used to have. They may be unhappy to say, oh, hang on, we are new entrants. You have given me too little. It is not economically viable. So there's many reasons to make people unhappy. And if you allocate fishing rights and there's no litigation, you must know you have upsetted those who don't have money to go to court. So that's the issue. So it is quite very critical, therefore, that the rationality test is passed, how to do that split. So when the allocation I did in 2015, we decided on a 10%. It depended. It was dependent on sectors, let me say. But let me talk of the Hague inshore trawl, for instance, that ended up in court. It was 30% that was set aside for the new entrants, and 70% had gone to the returning applicants. And of the 30 was split between the new people and those that were having rights in other sectors, the 30%. Now, to understand fully that, as I say, you would have to go to the Viking case, because that was the case that was a watershed in my view, because when Viking went to court, they were basically saying to the court, you have taken away 10% of what I used to have. And the jobs that I would have created or maintained with that 10% are all gone. Now, rationality test was passed in that ruling. If you would need to read the entire ruling in the Viking case. So basically, as I say, Miles, there is no right figure or percentage to cut at. There's a lot of things that you need to consider. But the Act says there shall be a recognition and need for the new entrants. How far you can go is debatable. What sectors you can go? Let's take deep sea hate troll, for instance, which is the reality. If you are giving 1% of the TAC to a new entrant in a deep sea troll, what are you doing? That's not economically viable. How are those people ever going to invest in the sector? How are they going to realize that? Automatically, they will go back and sell those rights. And as we see, something that is prevalent in the fishing sector in South Africa, of paper quota holders that clog the system.
So you just touched on it briefly. Also, one of the topics that are also a big contention in the FRAP process is in 2015, 2016. Give us some of your guidance in terms of transformation. So we have a company, they want to get into the fishing industry. There is no set and cast and stone saying you have to be 50% black or you have to be 60% black. Maybe can you just touch on why there isn't a strict rule on BEE limits, and what was taken into account when you decided on a BEE limit for new applicants, current applicants, category B?
A very, very, very interesting question, and a contested one. Transformation is not contested in the fishing space in South Africa. Transformation is contested in every sector of the economy in our country. We need to appreciate that, recognize that, and accept that. Then secondly, transformation is a policy of government, and we cannot run away from it. But having said so, transformation has been a moving target, in particular when it comes to rights allocation. The reason why you cannot set a percentage is because, one, from my own experience, it is difficult to set a percentage because, remember, when you allocate fishing rights, you don't first and foremost go for transformation, for instance. So there is 3 stages of how you do the assessment of applications. So in a way, you use transformation in a 2-tier way, kind of as a balancing act. For instance, if you have got 10 companies that have made it to the cut, but you can only give fishing rights to only 5 companies because of the limitation of what is available. So you need to apply to say, of the 10 companies, which 5 becomes the best? Okay, are they all transformed? Yes, they are transformed. At what level are they transformed? This one is 50%, this one is 60, this one is 70. Okay, the 71, for instance, at which level of transformation are they? So within transformation, you look at a number of elements of the transformation. And again, this was one of the issues that Viking has contested in that court case. And the ruling talks very clearly on it, that what we did in 2015 was actually justifiable. So basically, you would look at the ownership, at an ownership level, the transformation at ownership, the transformation at a board level, transformation at senior management of the company, in terms of the salaries, who earn much more salaries in this company, because you can be 70% black owned, but you find that 60% of those blacks are earning far less than the top 10 that is remaining there. So that again becomes the focus. Of course, the reason that we focused in 2015 more on ownership, and which I still believe that ownership is very critical, is because with any policy in the country as we know it, and transformation being contested, there is clever ways of circumventing the policy, and you pose yourself to be transformed. Again, the Viking case talks about that, because the Viking example, for instance, they had indicated that they were 37% black owned. But when we started exposing and going to the details of it, we found that it was 7% black owned. So the issues is that it's very easy to circumvent all of these policies. You can procure your stationery from a BEE, whatever, and you say, I must score high because I buy my stationery from a black company, but the ownership is a complete different picture. So it's quite very critical for people to really understand which levels of transformation matter the most, because that becomes a balancing act and a balancing factor, and it also becomes a tiebreaker, because now if both myself and Miles make it to the end and only one of us can get the allocation, then you must look further as to say, what else can we look at as a tiebreaker to say it must be Siphokazi over Miles?
Yeah, no, 100%. And then also, yeah, you also touched on it. So does it mean that when you apply, most of the applicants that are on a short list, they are deep dived? So they'll say the 80% black owned, but you guys in your 2015 look deeper into that 80% of the levels of transformation of the company.
Absolutely. That is very critical. And hence I am saying it's important for people to put information that is truthful. If you put false information, you will do it at your own risk, really, because those verifications may be done, they may not be done. I mean, look, in 2015, we wanted to do those verifications, but the verifications were never done, meaning those who cheated the process got away with it because there were no verifications that were done. I must acknowledge that as well, to say they may not be done, the verifications, but just in case they get done, then you are in trouble, because those rights may be revoked under the Act permits that. If you misrepresent the facts, then the right may be revoked.
Yeah, 100%. And then Siphokazi, just the other question is in 2015, 2016, biggest challenges, biggest headaches, what were they?
Wow, okay. Any rights allocation process, as I have indicated, because of the administrative burden, timelines become a challenge. It's a given thing. And I mean, currently, I sympathize really with the department, because under the COVID situation and all the regulations that have come with that and everything, it makes the process even much more cumbersome and difficult. So there's a lot of glitches that can come with the administrative process of it. But on the allocation process, I think one of the challenges that I really found was the lack of reliable data or data. So I always confuse the two. So what happens is that, because when you allocate fishing rights, as I say, you depend on the information that the applicant is giving to you. For instance, if Miles is saying, I employ 15,000 people, and of these 15,000 people, I pay them this amount of money, and I create these other value chain kind of jobs. I've done these kind of investments, and though people put these things out there, some of the things are very difficult to verify at face value. That's one of the things. The other big challenge, I think, that I have noticed is that in terms of quantum allocation, miles applies to say 5 fish, I create 2 jobs. Siphokazi applies 5 fish, I create 20 jobs. And then because remember, when you allocate quantum, you must be able to justify the quantum to economic viability of that quantum. And I always say this, that fisheries is not just an activity, it is an economic activity. You may want to do a PR exercise around it to say fisheries is something else. Fisheries is an economic activity first and foremost. People fish because they want to make money. They may want to feed the nation and all the good things, but you fish to make money. Now, if you are fishing to make money, the amount of fish that you get allocated can either make you break even, or you could be running that business at a loss, or you would be making profit. It depends. But what I found as a challenge is that where do you really cut the line to say 5 fish is enough for miles to make this business a profitable business? That is linked to even how the structures of the companies are designed. Because the fishing companies, the structures, in my view, are very complex. And a lot is obscured. There are things that you cannot see. In particular, companies that are called groups, Miles Fishing Group. Now, Miles Fishing Group has got a sub-entity. That sub-entity has another sub-entity. That sub-entity has another sub-entity. And it gets more blurry the harder you try to dig into it from above the surface. That also goes again to the issue of transformation. That if you want to look at transformation, are you really seeing the owners? Are you really seeing participant owners, or are you seeing spectator owners? How do you decide who is a spectator, who is not? And then the other biggest challenge that I think I have seen is at the new entrants. How do you really, with ease, to say these indeed are the most worthy, deserving, that indeed these new entrants are going to become entrepreneurs in the sector? They are going to be there to run these enterprises. Are they not going to be giving off these rights at some point in time? That's another thing that I have experienced. The other thing I've experienced, Miles, which I want to talk a bit about, which is a sad issue, is the number of barriers to entry, not only for new entrants, but also for people who hold fishing rights in other sectors who want to expand. A number of SMMEs, they get lost in the middle somehow because of some of the things like the accessibility, for instance, or suitability of a particular vessel. Now, you would see that close to allocation, some of the people that have the vessels, they deny access for those people, because you can apply for a fishing right even if you don't have a vessel. But if you don't have a vessel, you must have a catch agreement or an access agreement with a person who owns the boat. Now, you find that some people who own the boats develop some artificial barriers for these individuals for them to be able to have access to these vessels. One of the biggest challenges has been that now when you look at these new entrants who are willing to get into this, and remember, a new entrant does not have much of the experience or no experience at all, probably not much of the skill or none at all. And these people probably don't even have credit worth to be given certain loans to kickstart their businesses. So they are kind of so dependent or so reliant to those who are already in the sector. And there's a lot of issues that are at play there. Of course, It's about competition, because again, do I grant access to you? You get the right, whereas the boat belongs to me. So it's a lot of those issues, really. Those are really found to be one of the challenges. And at some point, to be honest, you feel like you are just shooting in the dark, because there is no certainty around some information, basically, that is there.
No, 100%. Siphokazi, yeah, we're moving to an hour. I feel I can speak to you for another hour, because it's very, very interesting to get insight. The one thing, or just two last questions I wanted to ask you is, one, explain to me or explain to us the CS reports, because with the current process, they say they have to do CS reports sector specific. I just want to understand what is a CS report and what goes into a CS report.
Okay. The context, again, to the issue of CS, socio-economic impact assessment. That's what basically these are. The cabinet took a decision after the debacle around Home Affairs, when they took a decision that when people travel, they must have unabridged birth certificates of the minors they are traveling with. Now, when that happened, there was a huge outcry that as a result of that decision, there was a lot of disturbance in the tourism sector, where some people and some families could not travel well, or they would have traveled and they don't have these. But there was a big outcry that came about, that this decision is not encouraging people to travel around, in particular, how it was affecting the tourism sector in particular. So after that, Cabinet took a decision that for every policy that then gets implemented, there needs to be an assessment, a social impact assessment of that policy. How is that policy not going to disturb XYZ jobs, for instance? How is it not going to disturb supply of whatever it is? If we talk about fish, for instance, how are you not doing market disturbances into the sector? Someone may say, yeah, if you've got 90% of new entrants in the deep sea hake, that is obviously going to disrupt the market and things like that. So that's the background and the reason why social economic impact assessment has to be done in these policies. Okay. Now, as per the announcement and the public announcement that was done by the department, they anticipate that they will engage in those probably they have started already. So that's basically the work that they need to do. I sympathize with them in the most honest way, because it's quite a very tedious work to do. And I'm saying tedious because I would say what the Deep Sea Trawl Association, SATSTIA, has done. SATSTIA commissioned a report through Genesis to do the impact assessment on the Hague Deep Sea Trawl. That report is, I should think it's public knowledge. I mean, now it's in the public domain. So if you look at that report, that would basically be what a CS process would do in terms of assessing those different things within the policy. So I anticipate that the department may be doing something similar to what SATSTIA did with the Deep Sea hake, or probably, I don't know. I think there are other associations perhaps that have also taken an initiative as well to do impact assessments within their own sectors as well. I should think that there would be that interest, at least from the industry side, but this one will be driven by the department.
Siphokazi, I've touched on all. I think I've touched on all the questions I wanted to ask you. regarding the FRAP and your experience. So tell us what's keeping you busy and what's Siphokazi's future plans?
Oh yeah, a lot of things I'm busy with. Currently, I'm involved with an international network. It's an international network. It exists in 4 continents. This network basically is around illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, because there's a big threat to fishing resources in different parts of the world and in South Africa as well, whereby the fishing resources, same we're talking about for people applying to have access to it, but there is serious external threats like illegal fishing that is happening across the oceans. So we are a network in these different parts of the world working into that, in ensuring that we work toward a base of creating awareness and of doing what needs to be done in terms of preventing these high levels of fisheries crimes, basically. So I'm involved in that and I'm busy with that, keeping me quite very busy. While I'm in transit, of course, to go to the Eastern Cape, as you would have known, that I'm soon taking up a job in the Eastern Cape. So I'm in transit in doing that, but I'm still kind of getting very involved in the fisheries space. Because as I've indicated, fisheries to me was not a job, was not just a job, it's my career. It's what I do. So even though I'm not in the department, I'm still in the fishing space quite in a very big way, and it is going to be much bigger than it has been actually.
Lovely. Mr. Ndudane, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I enjoyed this conversation. It was very, very informative. I've been in the fishing industry for a while, and it's really nice to see that, to hear the other side or other perspective. And I think that's exactly why I created this platform, because there are so many people in South Africa that are very knowledgeable and that have expert knowledge of the side of the industry that we don't see. So we don't see the fisherman at sea with the crewman catching. We don't see that. And I would want to have a conversation with those type of people as well. So I hope I added value through this conversation, and I'm definitely sure we're going to chat again as we go on closer, because I think there were a few items I wanted to discuss with you, but now that everybody knows the background of FRAP, I think we could go deeper into other issues that people would want to see when the drafts come out, and so yeah. Any last?
Let me congratulate you, Miles, actually, for creating this platform. And I think really one of the positive spin-offs around the COVID is, doing things in a different way, connecting virtually to have these conversations vis-a-vis having to convene people in one place doing this. Most people don't they don't participate in the fishing space, I will tell you, because of lack of information. The information is basically not there. Even you go to the websites, you can go to websites and stuff like that. You don't get readily packaged information that is kind of easy to digest and that takes you through and everything. So really, I appreciate what you are doing. And I should congratulate you for starting these conversations, and I'm happy you're going to broaden them. Look, I think for me, really, it's about giving out the information. And I can tell you right now, so many people have so much uncertainty around a number of things. Even those who are right holders, I can tell you right now, there's so much uncertainty of every process. It's how it is. So the little it's spoken about, the more it's kind of creating secrecy of some sort. And once there is seemingly some secrecy, it creates impressions that things are happening and being cooked in the behind closed doors and stuff like that. So really, I mean, creating public platforms where people can debate, share their ideas. We may not agree on some of the things, but at least we must debate the things. I think it's a good beginning. Keep it up. I enjoyed this. I mean, as I say, fisheries is my career. It's career to me. It was not just a job. The job found me in the space. It's something really I think we need to talk more about in South Africa, and in particular because in South Africa, if you look at the fishing space, it's so bloated because it's just the harvesting part of it. You've not talked about value addition and the number of jobs that can be created in the value addition. What do you do with the bones of the fish? What do you do with the scales of the fish? What do you do with the intestines of the fish? You can turn them into liquid fertilizer. You know, there's a lot of things. There's blue fashion now where handbags, shoes, belts, and everything are being made from the skin of the fish. So there's so much things that can really be talked about in the South African context for entrepreneurs to thrive in, things that can happen that are not just about catching fish, but that are about value addition as well, that can create the needed jobs.
No, 100%. And I mean, I wanted to touch on it, but we don't have enough time. But there's such a big conversation around small-scale fishing, getting 15-year rights now. I mean, that's a massive industry as well, which is also intricacies of family-owned businesses. So I definitely, that's the plan, to get someone from small-scale forums to come chat to us about how they're doing fishing, what are the challenges, so that the general public can also know that those guys that are catching crayfish are actually cooperatives. They're working together. So thank you. Siphokazi, we can go on for the next 2 hours, but thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I've learned so much. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is all mine, Miles. Thank you.
Okay. Guys, so this was the first one. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So next week, we also have another guest. I just have to confirm time with him. And then I hope to see you, hopefully not on Facebook. Hopefully we got the other platform going next week. So next week, we'll be able to have another fishing industry conversation, the second one. And I hope to see you there. Siphokazi, bye-bye. Enjoy.
Definitely. I'll tune in for all of them.
Thanks. See you. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Thanks for joining. Bye.